Market news now. Shares in Asia were lower as the Bank of Japan announced its decision to hold steady on monetary policy. The Nikkei in Japan declined 0.9%. The Bank of Japan kept interest rate targets unchanged, and the central bank cut its real GDP growth outlook and consumer inflation forecast for the fiscal year this year. Looking at what's happening in Europe, European stocks were mixed as investors digested corporate earnings and looked ahead to a rate decision by the European Central Bank. Stateside, stock futures edged higher in pre-market trading. Wall Street looking to more earnings news and, of course, that important read on economic growth. To talk to us about the themes that are playing out in terms of global and local markets, we're joined by Patrice Rousseau, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Ashburton Investments. Patrice, thank you so much for your time. I mean, given that background, given, some of the stuff you're looking at on your screen, how would you describe sort of the global and local market sentiment right now?
Good afternoon, Anastasia. The global sentiment is very positive. We've seen an 80% earnings beat from the US, which really has ignited a lot of the big IT stocks. Not so much in Europe, but I think the global sentiment towards reflation is very positive. And interestingly enough, despite a bit of a weaker rand over the last few days, we're seeing the JSE really on the front foot, led by the global cyclicals, the resources shares up 1%, and you're finding Anglos and BHP, the two big heavyweights, the resources sector, leading the way there. So very much our market going up with the rest of the world, and some of the global players on our market, like Anheuser-Busch, really beating estimates. We're seeing Anheuser up 8% on our markets as well. So that's really translating into quite positive uplift to the JSE.
So we've seen numbers from Datatech and ICT Group, EOH, but let's kick off with Datatech. Revenue up 15%, EBITDA higher. What did you make of their financials?
Yeah, excellent results from Datatech. Really a shoe-in from what we've seen, Anastasia, from the rest of the world, where these IT stocks benefiting from huge increase in demand for their cloud services and work also. Sorry, I think I lost you there.
Oh, we're still here.
So apologies for this. Still here. But with EBITDA up 24%, earnings per share up 3 times, share price up almost 4.5%, I think very positive, which contrasts with EOH, where the loss has reduced from 1.3 billion to going into a small profit. But our market a bit disappointed that not yet on an earnings per share basis in a profit situation, really talking about further disposals to get a turnaround going. So rewarding companies which are beating on a sales and top line basis, not so much in terms of EOH, which is down 4.5% at the midway point.
So let's move things stateside and look at US Q3 earnings. Some of the companies, well, in fact, I would say majority of the companies that reported beating expectations. What do you make of earnings season so far that side? Are you anticipating any clouds in the horizon as we go into the fourth quarter?
Yeah, look, I think it surprised most of us, given that if you're looking year on year, the base started to get quite high. It's going to be increasingly difficult for these companies to beat. Some of them have demonstrated the fact that they have new growth vectors like cloud services. If you look at the results from Amazon, for instance, and even what Microsoft was speaking about, they haven't been impacted by chip shortages at all. And the demand remains very buoyant despite the return to the office. So I think these trends are there to stay. The problem I find is that expectations are extremely high and valuations are very high for these stocks in the US. So a lot is already baked in, which means that it's likely into next year, as the economy is slow, as we have tapering, that they might start to disappoint. Yet I think the next quarter, as you asked, will still be a strong one.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. As the Chief Investment Officer at Ashburton Investments, how hard or easier has your job become? I mean, we're about, say, 10 months or almost 11 months into the year. Everything is, we're starting to wind down, I suppose, as we get into December. But so far, when you look back at the past few months, how easy has it been or difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good question. If you look a year ago, everyone was very, very bearish. Even earlier this year, with what was going on in KZN in terms of the riots, everyone was quite bearish, and yet the JSE has just gone one way up. One thing to say is valuations in South Africa are still reasonable compared to the rest of the world. I think what's been quite difficult is to buy into this whole story globally driven by the US. And we've seen just now data releases where the US GDP has disappointed slightly. So South Africa has been a firm valuation story, a reopening trade. The rest of the world has been one driven by central banks and QE. And that's what's made it very difficult for us as fundamental investors to believe that central banks globally would keep on flooding the markets with liquidity and that tapering would only happen later in the year. But we are at this juncture now where I think it's going to get quite difficult into the new year next year.
All right, Patrice, before I let you go, quickly, what are you looking out for? What are you keeping an eye on?
I think right now, still the same themes in terms of looking at results release right now. I think it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of the beats. I think the South African centric companies also producing very good results. So that's what we're focusing on. And I think the next area of focus will be when our own Reserve Bank will be hiking interest rates. I think a lot is baked into the market. So that will be the turning point where after record cuts in interest rates, we're going to start to see a stabilization and upward movement in short-term rates in South Africa. So that also will be in tune or in line with what we see in the rest of the world.
All right, Patrice, thank you so much for your time. That is Patrice Rousseau, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Ashburton Investments. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have the labor force with Mbongeni Motho.